I want to talk. Can you pull up that Kashmir article quickly before we go to Joshua Khan?
Yeah.
I just share your screen because I don't have it in front of me. So apparently in the last couple of days, there has been some sort of border heightened tensions at the border between India and Pakistan. I'm honestly not sure. I've heard conflicting reports. I've heard actual exchange of ammunitions. It's hard to get too much of a grip on all the specifics of that situation for a variety of reasons, including lack of press access. It is and remains one of the most, maybe the most dangerous place in the world. And the tension between India and Pakistan could lead, obviously, to global catastrophe. So it's something we have to watch. And this is also a couple of things I want to just note as a kind of basic solidarity, and I'll quote from this piece in Jacobin. But we've talked about this now for several months. The BJP government of Narendra Modi has torn up the Indian constitution. It has stripped the sort of somewhat autonomous arrangement with Kashmir in terms of some local governance structures and some autonomy. However, we already know that for decades, Kashmir was one of the most militarized areas, maybe the most on earth, and that there have always been numerous and very systemic and brutal human rights violations, including torture and murder from the Indian military. There's a Pakistani interest and a Pakistani support, absolutely, for groups that have committed terrorist acts in India. And terrorist acts I define really across the board as an act that specifically targets civilians, period, regardless of context behind it. Context we always need to understand, but the actions we need to be clear about. And obviously, Pakistan is not driven by altruism by any set stretch of the imagination. And then there's Kashmiris caught in the crossfire, a fair amount of whom I think would actually like some, frankly, greater autonomy from both. But the situation has been very dangerous geopolitically, even more so in the last several months between India and Pakistan, an unstable Pakistan with a sort of Imran Khan being dominated and essentially understood by a lot of people to be a pawn of the military, and an extreme right-wing government in India who are attacking Muslims in India across the board. So I'll quote now, this is from a piece in Jacobin. India may be the world's largest democracy, but its other claim to fame, according to a recent report by Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, is the world's second largest importer of arms. With all of its allocation for defense, almost 5 times as much for health, the country also spends significant parts of its budget manufacturing as many weapons as it can domestically. The Indian authorities transport much of this weaponry to the northern valley of Kashmir, where it is deployed on the streets against unarmed protesters demanding their right to self-determination. Indian forces have experimented on the people of Kashmir with a whole range of weapons over the years. They've used pellet guns, which they claim are non-lethal, to maim and blind tens of thousands of ordinary people. They routinely fire tear gas canisters of various kinds, which have, along with many other casualties, resulted in the deaths of 2 schoolboys after military men shot them in the head at point-blank range. Indian forces have killed thousands with weapons they consider, quote-unquote, non-lethal, and countless more lethal ones, all with complete impunity. And it goes on to talk how specifically now, obviously in the corona age, the underlying health problems and factors that are structural to Kashmir, along with the relentless brutality, are being used also against the Kashmiri population, and to consolidate this, it already was an occupation, so I'm not sure this enhanced aggressive policy ever since the tearing of the Indian constitution several months ago. I think the other thing that's really important to look at here, just in the bigger picture, is that, and very much relates to the conversation with China, multipolarity in the world is a very important goal. There's nothing inspiring, obviously, about great powers competing for influence or dominance of arms markets, obviously. We would hopefully like to in some way graduate from capitalism and leave that world behind entirely. But when you have countervailing powers, you, as an example, you push back the hegemony of one, which is always innately deeply dangerous. So that's one aspect of multipolarity. Deeper and more interesting aspects of multipolarity are what, if you really genuinely start, if you use the BRICS the way Lula envisioned it, and as an example, you looked at alternative world currencies and you looked at supporting proper development policies, maybe you could have a much more democratic, just, and free world, right? The contradiction that's showing up among many right now is that there are countries, like particularly China, that in the international system are calling for multipolarity, and that has a lot of innate positive consequences. It's like I'm making a really basic point that any type of enhanced competition is in the aggregate a good thing. It has its own, now, see people getting set off. Yes, it's enormously dangerous. It could lead to war. It's not necessarily a good thing. But on the other hand, like if you look at the Soviet Union role in many countries in Africa, was it altruistic? Did they at times support groups that committed atrocities? Of course, but at the same time, you can't separate a lot of groups that were struggling against racist regimes and against imperialism. They received material backing from the Soviet Union. And in a unipolar world, that backing is not there. So at the same time, I want to just say, though, that I think and this way it links back to Kashmir and has implications for China, is that a lot of countries that have a really strong sense of multipolarity in the international system do not necessarily have an interest in multipolarity inside their own context. And you're seeing a lot of rising powers that want more power and respect and different voices in the international system, even as they consolidate domestic hegemony. And that's definitely happening in India under BJP. And that's absolutely part of the manifestations that you see in what people in the human rights abuses in China, whether it's of the Uyghurs or the Tibetans. There is a sense of uniformity inside domestic context, which in some ways actually contradicts some of what is being called for in the international system.
I mean, just specifically this, the case in Kashmir right now is very frightening, as it's been since we've been talking about it, in this show. But fundamentally, the destruction of the communication apparatus there makes it very scary. So, like, the only information that we do get is trickled out, and as you see, states that have the ability now to crack down on populations, with the excuse of coronavirus. Them being able to use that power in very violent and frightening ways is something that we have to certainly be watching for, and trying to call out as much as we can, because in the darkness, these states have a lot of ability to enact a lot of horrors on people.
Absolutely.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.